Let's talk about organic fertilization. Organic fertilization is the only way with cover crop, with crop rotation, that we can use in our organic production to increase the fertility of our soil. Organic fertilization, in fact, is the only type of fertilization that can be used in our organic production, in our organic system, and is more difficult than the chemical fertilization because the availability of nutrients, the amount, the material that we use as organic fertilization can vary a lot the effect of on our soil. So is to decide the right the right organic fertilizers, we have to know the characteristics of organic fertilizer in general. They have to they must have a good nutrients content, good physical characteristic, and don't be hazardous for human health and or the environment. They have to be cheap. Also, organic fertilizers need to be a lot, a good amount, a good quantity of material to be able to satisfy the needs of farmers. Also, we have to they have to be not used in another industry uh, with no other economically advantageous uses. And also, the material that can be used for organic fertilizers need to be classified in the current regulation. In general, fertilizers with a macroelement concentration less than 2 or 3% are classified as soil amendments. So they are used to enhance soil physical characteristic, not fertility. And they are used in areas really close to the place of production. Um, because the concentration of nutrients is so s- small that the transportation cost for the material is not justified. Also, organic fertilizers mainly provide nitrogen and then phosphorus and potassium. Fertilizer derived by animal waste are richest in nutrients, and for this reason are the most interesting ones. Also, organic fertilizers need to have must have a good physical characteristic to allow a good distribution on the soil and after easy subsequent tilling of the soil. So we prefer fertilizers, liquids or suspension, easy to distribute, with reduced size or particle size, or in form of pellets. The third point is safety. Organic fertilizers tend to be derived from waste or production residues from other industry or sector. Um, and sometimes need to be analyzed to avoid risk for human health or environmental pollution. Um, for all material, excluding those from animal waste, there are regulation for the content of heavy metal with maximum limits of tolerance, because heavy metal can be dangerous both for human and also for the environment. The European Fertilizer Regulation of 2019, for example, indicated that the amount of cadmium, sorry, hexavalent chromium, mercury, nickel, lead in organic arsenic need to be under the number and the content that are mentioned in the slides. Also, the fourth point is price. The cost must be competitive with that of other fertilizers or with mineral fertilizer, for example. Fifth point, processing. We need a large quantity of material and a constant flow, not a seasonal availability of this material. And also, the fertilizer production needs to be located close to our farms, for example, because there is the transportation cost that sometimes is really expensive. Pro and cons of organic fertilization. One big pro is the lower nutrient solubility. So we will have a slow releasing of nutrients. And sometimes for chemical fertilizers, for mineral fertilizers, this characteristic is made by the processing of mineral fertilizers to have a slower releasing. Instead, for organic fertilization, we have at the beginning our material can release slowly with the degradation of microorganisms, a releasing of nutrients. And for the same reason, we will have a less nutrient loss. So we know that if we are giving 10 kilos of nitrogen, the releasing of nitrogen will be slow. And for this reason, our crop will be able to uptake all the 10 kilos of nitrogen that we will have. But the cons of this characteristic is that it's difficult to meet the nutritional needs of the crop during different phenological stages. With chemical, with minerals fertilizer, we can add fertilizer during the crop cycle, and we can satisfy different elements that the crop needs in a different phenological stage with the add of adding mineral fertilizers. Instead, in organic fertilization, we cannot meet sometimes the nutritional needs of the plant when the plants are growing. And also, it's difficult to predict the nutrient release because the degradation of the organic matter of the organic fertilizers depends by a lot of abiotic and biotic factors like temperature, water, microorganism, and so on. So the prediction is not easy. Also, sometimes if we have a really short crop cycle, for example, lettuce, most of the time the degradation of the organic fertilizers is not suitable for a rapid response from the crop. Another big problem of organic fertilization is the cost. Most of the time, the cost of nutrients is always higher than that for mineral source, for mineral fertilizers. And so sometimes the slow release of nutrient not justified the cost of our organic fertilization. But we are in organic production, so organic fertilizers are the only way to add nutrients in our soil from our input. During this lesson, I will talk about the main source of organic fertilizers: vinasse, manure, effluent, poultry manure, and compost. We will see some specific characteristic of these five different type of organic fertilizers, and we will see the application. We will see what the organic regulation said, and also the characteristic, the nutritional characteristic, physical characteristic of each type of organic fertilizers. Let's start with vinasse. Vinasse is a processing residues resulting from the fermentation of sugar-rich materials, as for example fruit, wine byproduct, sugar beet, alcohol, and organic acids. What's happening? The microorganism during the fermentation are using sugar for energy source, and they are producing, for example, alcohol, sugar that are used as a final product. We are using for organic fertilization the residues of this fermentation that is rich in proteins and nutrients, mostly nitrogen and potassium, which remain in suspension of the final product. So we can classify vinasse depends by which product are put in the fermentation process. For example, we talk about molasses, where when we are using the byproduct of the refining of cane sugar or sugar beet for the production of alcohol and sugar, or vinasse. It is a byproduct of the fermentation process of molasses with ethanol and other products, or vinasse from distiller industry, which is the byproduct resulting from the production of alcoholic beverage. Vinasse is an organic fertilizer that is allowed in the organic regulation for the organic production in the organic regulation. But is not allowed the vinasse extracted with ammoniacal salt. This type of vinasse are excluded. We can use vinasse both for animal feed and fertilizers. We don't have a lot of vinasse on the market, so there is a scarce availability in the market because there is a decline in the sugar industry in general, and also the use in for animal feed for livestock increased more than the utilization as fertilizers. Here in the table, we can see the chemical characteristic of molasses and vineyard residues. Molasses have higher dry matters, 57, 60%, 38% of organic carbon, and the amount of nitrogen and potassium is quite consistent. We talk about 3.57% of nitrogen and 2.4, 3.2% of potassium. This is the only organic fertilizers with a good amount of potassium, and mostly can be used also for the preparation of foliar fertilizers, so for the application of fertilizers in the foliar and aerial biomass, in addition with some micronutrients. Vinasse and molasses can be used and distributed in the field, both liquid or solid, in solid form. And the water content can be managed using mechanical centrifugation or thermal process to decrease the amount of water in the fertilizers. Liquid fluid vinasse can be used in open field as a base fertilizer, so at the beginning of our crop cultivation. And the distinctive features, so the particular characteristic of vinasse is the gradual release of nitrogen and the high potassium content that we will not find in other organic fertilizers. It also can contain a good amount of sulfur and microelements. But in other end, we will see that vinasse is the fertilizer with the lowest minimum nitrogen content. Poultry manure. Poultry manure is the dried poultry manure that come from the dropping the residues of domestic birds with or without litter. The chemical characteristic of poultry manure can vary a lot depending on bird species, the farming methods, the type of litter, and also the maturation of the poultry manure. In general, poultry manure is permitted, but have to came from organic poultry farms, not from industrial farms. we can see on the table in the table the different, for example, moist percentage in moisture of different poultry farming system. For example, ducks on straw, so where the litter is made by cereal straw, have a moisture from 10 to 40%. Instead, free range chicken on straw have a moisture between 35 and 60. Also, the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium vary a lot. For example, we can have the higher amount of nitrogen in the poultry manure with the free-range chickens on straw or with turkeys on wood shavings, for example. So this table is just to show the great difference in the composition of poultry manure depends by the species bird or the litter type of litter used. The chicken manure is made fermenting before burying it or using it for the as organic fertilizers, because the fermentation can decrease and eliminates the antibiotic substance that can cause environmental or health problem. And fermented chicken manure can also lose a lot of nutrients, and then can be used as a soil amendment, not as a soil fertilizers. Some producers are try to process and manage poultry manure to reduce uric acid and decrease the odor emissions, because the odor of chicken manure is really strong, with the centrifugation to separate manure and litter. And then they try to remove uric acid by the evaporation under vacuum condition. And then they are grinding the chicken manure. This process is useful both to avoid the emission of strange odor, and also to enhance the nutritional content of chicken manure that can be used after as fertilizers. Now we will talk about manure. Manure is one of the most common and known organic fertilizer that can be used in organic production, and in general in also in the conventional production. Um, Manure is the fertilizers produced by the fermentation of liquid and solid excrement from animal raised in stable or in their bedding. It's different from the slurry that is solely the excrement and water used to wash out the stables. We will talk now in this lesson about only the manure. Manure and its chemical characteristic can vary a lot depend on the type of animals that we are collecting, from which we are collecting the manure. We can have cattle, pig, horse, or sheep. And as you can see here from the table, we can have a really different chemical composition. For example, the moisture can vary a lot between 60 and 80, 60 and 70 for sheep. The nitrogen also can be 0.3, 0.6 percent on a dry matter. Of course, all these value are percentage on dry matter. And potassium can be between zero point 0.4 and 1 for cattle, and zero point 0.6 and 1.6 for pigs, for example. Horse and sheep manure in general are more drier and rich in nutrients, but for this reason they can generate more heat during the fermentation. Uh, Pig manure instead is less common and also is not so valuable as manure because it is really uh, it has a lot of water inside and less nutrients, so it's not so common. Cattle manure have instead intermediate characteristic between horse and sheep and pig, and for this reason also is the most common type that is used in agriculture in general. But cattle manure depends also from the type of bedding. Type of bedding affects mostly the water absorbency uh, that can influence after the fermentation of manure. So here in the table, you can see that, for example, cereal straw, has a water absorbance of 200, 240. Instead, peat or sawdust from deciduous plant or trees in general have an absorbance of 400, 450. Also, the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphate amount percentage can vary a lot between the type of bedding because, if, for example, if we are using legume straw, we'll have a higher amount of nitrogen than cereal straw. Or, for example, also peat that can be used as bedding as a intermediate level of nitrogen between legumes and cereals. Also, the percentage of beddings that is present in the manure can affect the final quality of our product. If we are using a lot of bedding, like more straw, we will have a manure with a more important amount of straw and, for example, a longer maturation times, fewer nutrients, and more organic matter. SO is organic matter. When we are using manure in the soil, manure is attacked by microorganisms really quick and can turn into humus in a really short period of time, releasing nutrients. The destruction of organic matters occurs in soil only with a higher temperature, oxygen, and humidity. So, if we are putting manure in the soil in late spring or early autumn, early fall, we'll have the maximum microbiological activity for the manure degradation. Also, manure is the only fertilizer that provides nutrient and organic matter at the same time, so can act both as fertilizers or soil amendment. Sewage, biomass, poultry manure have all of them are not rich in organic matter, mostly in nutrients. Instead, cattle manure or manure in general can have 20-40% of the product is transformed into stable organic matter. But we don't have to use manure in an easy way. I mean, easily, without thinking about that. Because if we are adding too much manure in our soil, we can have an excess of nitrogen or organic matter in the soil, and many species in vegetable group are not so suitable for manure or organic fertilization in general. For example, root species or other species that are sensible to excess of nitrogen. Also, we have to remember that an excess of nitrogen can cause a higher develop of the aerial biomass. Sometimes crops can grow in the vegetative part and don't put the energy to produce fruits that sometimes are the yield that we want. And sometimes also the excess of nitrogen can cause a enhancement in the sensitivity of the crop for the disease or pest. In this case, we can plug the manure into the previous crop or in the autumn winter period before planting, um, to exhaust the immediate effect of manure mineralization. So we have to program it a little the moment where we will put manure in our soil. So, for example, some crop are not good for having manure as the main organic fertilization, but we can put manure before them, and they can benefit from the residual effect of the manure application in the soil. We can spread manure in our soil really quickly, because if we wait too much, manure will lost organic matter from oxidation and also nitrogen from volatilization. And after the spreading, we have to plug and dig to bury it before preparing the soil. Never leaves piles or the amount of manures in one area, because it can pollute our soil, and also we can lose all the nutrients in one single point of our area. And the recommended dose is 30-50 tons for hectares every 3-4 years. The last organic fertilizer that I want to describe in this lesson is compost. Compost is a fertilizer produced from organic waste that has been biologically decomposed under controlled condition. For sure, we cannot have a table as for chicken manure, for biomass, for manure in general, that describe the chemical characterization of compost, because the different material that we can use to create compost can vary a lot the chemical composition of this material. And also the composting process itself can be also really important in the final chemical composition. Composting process is an aerobic process that can be divided in two main phases: the active phase or bioxidation phase and the maturation phase. We can composted many materials, but we need always the microorganism to um, prepare and carry out the composting process for us. We don't need to inoculate microorganisms, but we can find microorganisms in the material that we use at the beginning of the composting. The main factors that are influencing composting are the oxygen availability, the presence of air, oxygen in the amount of material that will be composted is really important, because the oxygen determined the porosity. Sorry, is the oxygen depends by the porosity of the material that we use. So if you are using a lot of wet material that when we put all the wet material together is not able to create some spot, some part where there is an airflow, this will decrease the amount of oxygen inside the amount of material that we want to compost, and this will slow down the process and also stop the oxidation process that allow the material to stabilize. Also, under anaerobic condition, it's not anymore composting, but is putrefaction. Also, we need oxygen, and in addition, we need an adequate moisture. That is really important for the microbial activity, but not be excessive, as I mentioned before, because if the material is too wet, there is no air, there is no oxygen. And the third factor is the CN ratio. The CN ratio need to be not so high and not so low. If it's high, the higher amount of carbon and low amount of nitrogen will slow down the development of microbial community. And if we have an excess of nitrogen instead, we will have the formation of and loss of ammonia, with the consequent decrease in the fertilizer's value, so the nutrients that we have in our compost. Now I will describe the main material that can be used for the composting process, divided in three main groups. Uh, Municipal solid waste is all the waste that we produce as a citizen, okay, that can be from selected users. So, for example, fruit and vegetable markets, shop, canteens, agri-food industry, agricultural waste, or paper industry, or from separate collection, so from domestic users, as me, as you. This type of municipal solid waste have lower CN ratio because we are wasting a lot of animal waste, a lot of food waste, but it's really high in salt because we are using salt for our kitchen for cooking, and also our waste have a lot of salt inside. Municipal solid waste in mainly is composed by organic substance, and normally they have a high CN ratio and also high moisture content. Also, for composting, we can use green waste, waste from the maintenance of public and private garden, as grass clipping, prunings, leaves, and so on. The composition of this type of material are really similar to agricultural residues, stalk, straw, and so on. Or also we can use waste from the timber industry. These materials provide structure to our compost because they allow us to have the aeration, the oxygen that I mentioned before. The only problem is that this type of waste most of the time is seasonal. So when we are cutting during the autumn, during the early spring, for example, uh, in this period we have a huge amount of green waste. Than not, for example, in winter or in summer. But this green waste can be stored also and used through the year for our composting process. This material has a really high CN ratio, low nitrogen content, and when used alone, the fermentation for the composting process is really longer than when we mix this material with the municipal solid waste or other material. Also, we can use sludge from sewage treatment plants. Um, We can use sewage sludge that come from wastewater treatment plants serving civil, agri-food, or similar settlement. The chemical characteristic of sludge is similar to agri-food plants and is really high in nitrogen and nutrient content, low in CN ratio, and have a high moisture content, so a lot of water. Um, this characteristic make it useful for mixing with the green waste for composting. So we are using sludge and green waste in a percentage of 50-50 to have the good mixture. So let's talk now about the processing of composting. First of all, we need to grind and mixing together all the material that I mentioned before in the proportion that we choose to have a good compost at the end of the process. Also, we are putting together different materials in a pile that during the composting process is turning over multiple times. And the initial mixing is essential for a proper CN ratio. So in all the pile, the CN ratio need to be the same. Otherwise, the fermentation will start in a part of the pile and not in all the other part. Then we have the accelerated biooxidation. This is a fundamental stage of the composting process because it consists the aerobic fermentation of organic matter from the microorganism. So there is the creation of high molecular weight molecules called humic compounds during this phase. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur create more stable compounds that are degradable in the soil environment, will be degraded in the soil environment. This reaction can vary and occur simultaneously. So it's hard to define the duration of the four phase that compose the accelerated biooxidation. But we can divide the composting process in four main phases. Psychrophilic phase, mesophilic phase, thermophilic phase, and post-thermophilic mesophilic phase. In the first phase, psychrophilic, we have the triggering of biochemical reaction and the latency period. So after the mixing, starts to be some biochemical reaction from microorganism. In the mesophilic phase, we have an acceleration of reaction with increasing of maximum temperature. And in this phase is when the more complex organic substance create the nutrients that we will have in our organic fertilizers. Then we have the thermophilic phase when we have the peak of temperature, the maximum of bacterial activity, and in this phase we have the inactivation of weed seeds and bacteria that can be dangerous in our soil system. And then we have the post-thermophilic or cooling phase, when we have a slowly slow down in biological activity because there is a depletion of oxygen and the raw material are already being degraded and fermented. At the end, we have the post-maturation. So our compost is stable and can be stored in a protected environment for at least 6 days before being used in our field. Once it's stable, of course, the product can continue the fermentation, but most of the nutrients are available and stable in the compost. Now I finished this lesson, and I want only to cite to show the bibliography that I use. This time I use an Italian book called Nutrire le piante, trattato di scienza dei fertilizzanti, where I found all the information about the organic fertilizers that I show you in this lesson.